Welcome back to another episode of Ask A Clutter Boss. I am Jes Marcy. I am your clutter boss for today, and this is our weekly decluttering advice show, the best and possibly only one on the internet. And in this episode, we are going to cover how to declutter sentimental items without the guilt. The guilt is actually another thing you can just declutter. How to increase your productivity when you're working from home, and 5 things that you can declutter right now. Let's dive right into these questions. The first question is, I often struggle with deciding whether to keep items that hold sentimental value but aren't very practical. Can you help me figure out how to make these decisions without feeling guilty? Yes. So sentimental items are extremely difficult to declutter. And we always say that we want to deal with sentimental stuff last. That's like the end of the decluttering journey. If you're somebody who feels like everything is sentimental, then you do have to kind of dive into this topic a little bit earlier on your journey. But sentimental items that are not practical. I guess my question would be, do you actually like the item? Is it sentimental just because it has like a family historical value to you? Is it sentimental because it represents a time in your past? Understanding why it is sentimental to you. And then if it's not practical, do you like it? Is there a reason besides practicality that you want to keep it? Just because something is sentimental, that is actually not a reason to hang on to it. If it is sentimental and also really positive and meaningful, and you just 100% love it and you love everything it represents, or it really represents a very significant period of your life, and you don't have a lot of other stuff that represent that period of your life, yeah, keep it. But if it's sentimental because it's supposed to be sentimental, like it's a family heirloom and you've been told your whole life that these things are sentimental and that's why they're sentimental to you, they're not actually sentimental to you. It's just something that you've been told, and you need to pull this apart, right? So if something is sentimental because it's supposed to be, but it's not practical and you don't like it, it's not really sentimental to you. It's just that you feel the guilt because you've been told that you should feel guilty if you throw it out. So you can declutter all of that. I love the fact that now that we are adults, we get to decide what works best for our lives. Because we were taught one thing growing up does not mean that it is still relevant to our lives right now. We get to choose what is relevant and what not. There is so much, I mean, specifically from our childhood that we have already decided doesn't make any sense to live our lives that way anymore. The world has changed tremendously. We used to go to the library to do research. We pretty much don't do that anymore. We use the internet. We used to have a landline to make a phone call. That's what we were taught was the right way to communicate. Things are different now. We can communicate via text message. We can, we don't need landlines anymore. There's so much about our childhood that is not the same anymore. And it was the case back in the day that family heirlooms were always sentimental because we didn't have that much stuff. Now we are left with whole estates that take up giant houses, sometimes outbuildings, storage units. All of that stuff cannot be sentimental to you. It's just too much. Just because it represents something that we were taught was sentimental doesn't mean that it still is sentimental. You get to choose your own rules that you live by when it comes to decluttering and organizing. Because you were taught to save everything doesn't mean that now, as an adult, you can't apply your own filter and your own reason and you can make your own decisions about what has to be kept and what is actually sentimental. And within whatever is sentimental, you still get to choose if it is sentimental and worthwhile keeping. It can be sentimental and you can let it go. That's totally possible. Sentimental doesn't equal keeping, always. You choose. You make your own set of rules. You make your own set of criteria. Sentimental, and the person in this question here, because there was something very important that was noted. I often struggle with deciding whether to keep items that hold sentimental value but aren't really practical. They aren't really practical. So, in my reading of this, you prioritize things in your life that are practical, which is awesome. So do I. And I have let go of a lot of sentimental stuff because it just wasn't practical. It wasn't practical to my day to day life. It wasn't practical to store it. There was nothing about it that made sense to keep it. Yes, it was sentimental. And yes, I let it go. And that is okay because it didn't fit within my personal criteria of things that I am going to keep, sentimental or not. So make your own rules for this. Remember, the world has changed. Your children are not going to teach their grandchildren the same thing that our grandparents taught us about what to keep and what to let go of. They're probably going to say to their grandchildren, there's so much stuff in this world, it's overwhelming, and you need to prioritize your mental health. And probably that's a lesson that our grandparents would have said to us also had they grown up in a different day and age. So we have to really start pulling this apart. And we were definitely taught a lot of things as children that made sense then that don't make sense now, above and beyond clutter, but in relation to clutter also. Declutter that. Declutter those lessons. They were relevant then, they're not relevant now. So I hope that this helps. You don't need to hang on to the guilt. Guilt is not propelling you forward at all. You can choose to let go of guilt. It's a choice. It's a choice to feel guilty or not. Let's go back many more generations before there was stuff to hang on to. What did we pass down? We passed down stories. We passed down oral traditions. We can go back to that. We can pass down stories and oral traditions and still let go of this stuff. So stuff has not always been the most important thing, and it doesn't need to be the most important thing. You do you. You can, yeah, absolutely. You can take a photo of it if you want to keep it. You can frame it. You can put it into a shadow box. You can make a collection. And then here's the key, Emily, and I love that you said this. If you want to keep it, if you want to keep it, you choose if you want to keep it. And if you do not want to keep it, that is your choice, right? You're an adult. You can make that choice and you can let it go from your life because that is what prioritizes your sanity. And I guarantee that your parents, grandparents, and many generations back would tell you prioritize your sanity. Make your life as stress free as possible because that is what is going to get you the furthest health wise. All right. There was a question that came in the comments here. So let's go ahead and dive into this question. It comes from a Facebook user. How do I handle decluttering when my husband has difficulty handling boundaries? When he not only takes care of his clutter, but he handles mine as well. He also tends to do the clutter shuffle rather than dealing with the stuff head on. I have a follow up question here. Your husband, when you say your husband handles your clutter as well, what exactly does that mean? Does he declutter your stuff for you? Does he not let things get thrown out that don't belong to him? In general, when we're decluttering, we declutter only our own stuff first and foremost, only things that we actually have the power to make a decision on because they belong to us. We don't declutter other people's stuff. And a lot of times, I would say, when it comes to family members, don't ask them to help you declutter your own stuff because they're going to influence your decision making. And sometimes that's great and sometimes it's not so great. But this really has to be your decision. What stays in your life, the things that you own that are your things, only you, no one else, only you knows what needs to stay. You know what is important to you. You know what is useful to you. You know what you have space for, period. Nobody else can make that decision. And when you allow somebody else to come in and influence your decision making, you're giving your power away. And the best outcome from decluttering is how empowering of a process it is. So when you take this power and you make these decisions and you bust over that fear, you're like, I am going to be guided by what I know to be right and true for me. I'm going to stand firm in this decision. And if it's the wrong decision or a bad decision, I'm going to be okay with that. I know that I can deal with any negative consequence that comes from letting go of something. I can handle it. I can handle these things. That's when you become so empowered in your whole entire life, not just with clutter. When you let somebody else handle your clutter, you're really giving up a lot of your ability to grow into a more empowered version of yourself. I strongly believe that the more empowered you can become, that is like the coolest thing ever because you can stand up for yourself in all sorts of circumstances when it comes to jobs, when it comes to making really important life decisions. You have the voice that you need in that moment. And it may seem so disconnected from decluttering, but it is not. It is decision making, it is learning what is right for you through a process of trial and error. It is understanding yourself better, knowing yourself better. That's what happens when you declutter. And if other people are super involved in this process, like, yeah, getting help, like having somebody move stuff out of the space or sit and chat with you, that's great. But actually giving the decision to somebody else is giving away too much, in my opinion. I have a friend who helps me with my spaces. I make the decisions. She boxes the stuff, folds them, and gets them out of the house. That is a perfect, I love that. That is a perfect way to use help. If you ever hire somebody to come and help you and they start telling you, you have to get rid of this, you have to get rid of that, they're taking that power from you and they're not there to support you. So fire them immediately. Thoughts on physical books versus Kindle? Should I just donate and read electronically? So that's a good question for you to answer. Do you like to read electronically? Okay. Do you enjoy reading books electronically? If so, then yes, donate and read electronically. If you don't love to read electronically and you like to have a physical book in your hand, the question is, do you want to hang on to that book when you're done reading it? Once you've read a book, unless you're going to reference it frequently or reread it again in the very near future, there really is no reason to hang on to it. You're really, other people could be enjoying that book right now, but you've already gotten what you were going to get from the book. You've gotten the experience of sitting and reading it. You've gotten the knowledge. You've enjoyed going down the storyline. You and that book have had an amazing time together, but it's over now. Hanging on to the book just takes up space. It collects dust. I mean, books are really heavy to store. Let it go. You can always, or I guess here's the question. Can you replace that book in less than 20 minutes for less than $20 if you really needed to? Could you go to the library and get that book out in less than an hour? If the answer is yes, then you don't need to hang on to it. You can totally let it go. And if you enjoy reading both ways, then I would start switching to more digital just because it takes up less space. Or if you have the book, just let it go after you're done reading it. Okay, so back to this question up here. Sometimes I find stuff in trash that belongs to me, but like you said, I want to make that decision. The power of making the decision was taken away from me. Yeah, that is huge. That is huge. It is never okay for somebody else to throw out your stuff, and it is never okay for you to throw out somebody else's stuff. Now, when it comes to children, that's a little bit different depending on their age. I mean, I think it's always good to involve them in the decision making. I still don't think you should force children to let go of stuff right out of the gate. But I think that you should work with them. But when somebody else throws out your stuff, that is actually a traumatizing experience. And if that happened to you as a child, or if you had a traumatic event where you lost a lot of stuff and somebody throws out your stuff now, that can be very re-traumatizing. So I would say, I think Facebook user, you said that your husband is struggling with the boundary that you're creating. This is a communication issue. Any way that you can more clearly communicate this boundary and be really firm with it. And communication in relationships is a whole topic into and of itself, obviously. But if this requires changing the way that you communicate, maybe involving a therapist to help with the communication, whatever it takes for you to communicate that boundary, it's huge. Maybe just play this podcast in the background. um, where your husband will hear it, but throwing out somebody else's stuff is not, it's just not okay, period. And that's the clutter boss answer. It is not okay to throw out somebody else's stuff. It is not okay for somebody to throw out your stuff. How can you take back that control? On to our next question here. We're shifting gears a little bit. So, at the start of the pandemic, I was transferred from my office to my house to work, and it was great. Although a lot is back to normal now, I am still working from home, and what was once so great is now impacting my productivity. Do you have any tips on being productive while you're working from home? Yeah, that is actually something that this is a path that I've had to walk down myself and figure out many, many, many times. Here are my top couple of tips for productivity working from home. Number one thing that makes going into an office so nice is that you have a change of environment. So typically, when you work not from home, there is some transportation required. You have to actually set yourself up in the morning to leave the house by a certain time. Then you have a change of scenery on your way to work. And then when you get to work, it's another change of scenery. Can you replicate this in your house? Can you make sure that you're always getting up at the same time, have a hard deadline for getting out the door, even though you're not really getting out the door, but maybe actually do get out the door? Maybe go for a walk, like a 5-minute walk, go for a drive, get some coffee or something, have that trigger of a different change of scenery before you start to sit down and work. And then when you do work from home, it is critical that you have a space that is only for your office professional work. Even if you sometimes float into the kitchen or into the living room or into the dining room, have a dedicated space to work and start there. These environmental triggers matter a lot, probably a lot more than we recognize. So having just a location that is only for work, where you start your work at the same time every single day after a change in scenery or something, maybe it's bringing your kids to school, whatever you can figure out where you have these set triggers every morning, that's going to help a lot with your productivity. The other thing with working from home is you have nobody actually looking at you to see if you're working. So that's that can be very difficult, because external accountability matters. So how can you build external accountability into your work week? Do you have a colleague that you could message and say, "Hey, going in for an hour, hard work. I'll let you know how it comes, how I do after this. Can you turn off all of your distractions, get rid of all your notifications, go into your work mode on your phone, put on some productivity music." But how can you have that external accountability that you naturally get in a office environment, at home? Can you figure out a way to build that in? And then make sure that when you're working from home, you stop and take breaks. I mean, when you're working in an office, you stop and take breaks. If you're a teacher, you have a set break time. You go for a walk, you use the bathroom, you get food at a set time. Anytime that you're in an office, you have built in breaks that happen naturally and planned. So make sure that you have that at home as well. And then when your workday is over, make your workday be over. Do not allow work to infiltrate into the whole rest of your life. And yes, talking to myself here, talking to my amazing business partner here, talking to the other coaches here, boundaries matter. Find support with your colleagues with those boundaries. And the thing about a work boundary is you might think that a boundary looks like telling a colleague that they cannot email you after a certain time. That's actually not really what a boundary is. A boundary is knowing that if you get a message from somebody at a certain time, you are going to uphold your own boundary and not look at it or respond to it until you're back at work the next day. I do think that culturally, we are shifting a little bit to being more respectful of work boundaries. I think that's what I have seen, recently is there's less of an expectation that an after hour work email is going to be responded to immediately. And I appreciate that. I think that we all realize the just total burnout that happens from having 24/7 access to work, but it is up to you to maintain those boundaries. Oh, here is a great, I love this great comment. Put shoes on when you work. Don't ask me why, but it's a subconscious trigger to be professional. That is fantastic. And, I can totally see that. Do you have a subconscious trigger that says to you, I'm working? Maybe it's putting shoes on. Maybe it's taking a shower. Maybe it's putting on makeup. If those are some triggers that help you feel like you're in work mode, then definitely do those. Those were the questions that we had so far submitted. I really appreciate they've been great questions. We had a couple from the comments, and I wanted to add a little segment at the end of this every Ask a Clutter Boss where I give you an idea of 5 things to declutter right now. So, 5 things that you can declutter right now. Number 1, an old pair of shoes that you don't wear. Number 2, extra winter accessories that you did not use this winter. Number 3, a small appliance that does not work any longer or is missing a part. Number 4, something that you have that's a duplicate that you don't need a duplicate of. Anything that you have that's a duplicate that you don't need a duplicate of. And number 5, something yellow. Something yellow. Those are your ideas to declutter right now. Thank you so much for joining us live for this edition of Ask a Clutter Boss. The rerun for this will be posted on Friday at 2 p.m. on YouTube. As always, the best thing that you can do to support our small business and keep this content free and weekly is to like, comment, and share. Like, comment, and share. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on our social media. Share the stuff that we put out there. It means so much. It means so much. So that's my little thank you if you do like, comment, and share. It's huge for us, seriously. Oh, thank you. I love you guys. And remember, you are a clutter boss, and it is time to prioritize your sanity. I will see you next week, same time, same place.